what's best for my son wasn't best for my daughter.
Right.
Because we're customizing education. Hi, hello. I am Miss Andrea.
I'm Miss Mare.
And today we're going to talk about avoiding homeschool mistakes.
From personal experience.
The number one mistake seems to be trying to replace a traditional classroom setting in a non-class environment.
Right. So, trying to replace a traditional classroom setting in a non-school environment or
not replace, replicate.
Trying to replicate a traditional homeschool setting in your home.
A traditional school setting.
Blech!
Recreating traditional school at home.
Yes.
Is kind of missing out on all of the fun.
That's the video that upset you so much. Remember when we were doing reaction?
Oh, yes.
And you lost your mind.
I looked at it and I'm like, that's not correct.
And I was
Don't
like,
do
very
that.
nice. You know, you see, I'm on a lot of homeschool message boards, and I see, I just started homeschooling, and I'm turning my formal dining room into a homeschool classroom. Where do I get chalkboards and bulletin boards and whiteboards, and where do I get desks? Unfortunately, and some of the new people are like, here's my desk source, here's my whiteboard source.
Oh, I had the old school desks that had like the desk built onto the chair.
I had those too, but those were just for fun when I was a little kid. But fortunately, a lot of people are like, don't do that. Don't do that.
Don't waste your time. Don't waste your money.
You know, just pull up to the kitchen table, and then sit there for a couple of hours, do work, and then let the kids wander off and study wherever they're going to study. Now, for us, we'd always had a home office. Our kids were born with a home office. And so we just yeeted Leslie out of it, took over the home office, and then he yeeted us out. And then we took over the dining room. But,
we pulled up the living room couch, and the floor in the living room.
I don't think we did the sofa till high school, but at that point, Jordan was doing her work under the dining table, and I just needed her on the couch long enough to speak to her directly without having to get on my knees and climb under the dining table. So
stare them in the eyeballs.
But be at home. Honestly, the first year of homeschooling, I was ill. And we started off really focusing on history, the classical model of history. And when we weren't at the computer doing like Reader Rabbit and Math Blasters, we were in my bed. I'd yell history in bed. And somebody would grab the big red history book, Kingfisher, and someone would grab the red thesaurus, and they'd just jump in bed.
Yeah.
And we stay in there for 90 minutes. Just doing history in bed.
Yeah.
And when we got to the high school years toward the end, we had Jackson had built a computer and hooked it to the living room TV.
Yep. Documentaries.
And so, we were doing documentaries, pausing, talking, and things like that. So
we did that in bed.
Let it be natural. Like, especially like I see a lot of parents saying, oh, we're trying to homeschool, and if 90 minutes of my kid throws a fit, because they're uncomfortable,
and
it feels schoolish.
Yeah.
So let it feel natural.
I understand. I completely understand the impetus behind this. Why you would want to replicate that classroom. It's familiar.
That's how we were taught.
Yes, for people who didn't grow up homeschooling themselves, and they're just embarking on this journey with their kids, and they don't come from a homeschool background. You want to go back to things that you know, and that's how you learned. So that's how you want to recreate the experience for your child. It's a waste of time, and it's a waste of money.
Sorry about the crack up, but I thought, I guess I need to like put on a habit and get a ruler and smack my children across the knuckles. Like,
maybe don't do that.
That was my experience.
But a lot of people that you're gonna pull from the things that you remember being comfortable about your schooling experience. But there is absolutely nothing about education that requires you to be tied to a desk, to a place, doing your thing here quietly, sitting perfectly upright, and let's mind your posture, and that's not necessary for learning.
Don't speak unless you're spoken to. Don't laugh, don't smile, don't even breathe loudly.
For me, because we homeschooled 2nd to 12th, which was actually 2nd to 11th, so
9 years.
9 years. It evolved. We started out in bed, or we were either at the computer in the office or in bed. And then middle school, we were at the dining table because I was writing. I had a job blogging, and they were doing assignments they had to hand in for their co-op. And then high school, it was documentaries on the sofa. Just do whatever's natural, whatever makes sense at that moment. But if you try to replicate school, there's gonna be a stop time. Do you know what I mean? There's gonna be this like, okay, we did this for 2 hours, or we did this for 4 hours, and we're done. Whereas if you're on the sofa, the conversation continues until it's finished.
Right.
You know, and you just keep learning. You just keep learning.
And that's another part of that whole replicating a traditional school environment is, you know, if you're coming out of having had traditional education yourself, you've got this mindset that, you know, school started at 8 a.m. and went to 3 p.m. And so you now have this mindset, well, my kids have to learn, you know, at homeschool from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. And you may have some of these external forces telling you that that's what you have to be doing.
Right.
You know, whether they're well-meaning family members or friends or everybody else. And are your kids really learning if you're not doing this full time? Understand, in a traditional schooling environment where you have one teacher and 15, 20, 30 students, that teacher has to make sure...
And those kids go home.
And the kids go home, but that teacher has to make sure that all of those students have gotten that information. And so they're spending longer times on topics than maybe is necessary because they've got to make sure that that slowest person in the class is still caught up with everybody else. And so for students that intuitively grasp things, or for students who are getting one-on-one attention, they're going to pick it up faster than students who are having to wait on their peers to all get on the same page. Because everybody in that classroom isn't going to have the same question about the material being taught. So you may have to answer this question or that question or another question, and the whole class has to wait until all those questions are answered. Because you are working one-on-one or one-on-two or one-on-three, you know, whatever. Once you get past about one-on-three, then oftentimes you'll have an older child who can hang with the younger kids, and so you can divide and conquer. But you're just answering the questions that your child has. And you don't have to spend extra time on the material that they intuitively grasp. So you don't need to replicate that same seat time either.
I mean, sometimes the older child will just decide that they want to teach the younger child something anyway.
Right.
Because Jordan had a speech impediment, and Jackson said, I'm going to fix that. So every day for 20 minutes, he would sit on the top stairs and they would just talk. And if she said something that was off vowel-wise, he would just correct the vowel. Like he made it was after lunch. He's like, stair time.
Yeah. So,
and that was his decision to do.
the biggest errors in trying to replicate a traditional schooling environment from a homeschool perspective is number one, you are losing the opportunities of homeschooling.
You're losing all spontaneity.
Number two, you're probably frustrating yourself and your child by requiring a specific set time out of something that's not necessary.
Sometimes math can be 10 minutes. Sometimes math's 90.
Right. And it's all going to depend on, you know, the level of comfort with the material, as long as the material's being learned.
And that day.
Right.
And what they've covered that week.
Then also, thirdly, you are potentially wasting time and money and effort that you don't need to waste because it's not going to work for your family. Homeschool mistake
opposite.
Right.
So
on the other end of the spectrum.
Homeschool mistake number 2 is not setting a routine.
Right.
So, and I have this conversation with teenagers a lot who kind of failed to do their homework because we're a homeschool program. We have a homeschool program. And sometimes the kids are like, life got away from me.
Yeah.
And I didn't do my homework. And so the conversation is, what did you have to do? Well, you know, I had all week to do these things. And then when I got time to do it, something came up. And I said, you're not getting things done because you don't have a schedule. You don't have a routine. And so when you have a schedule, then you know that you have this amount of time to get your work done. When a teenager tells me they have a job, I am so happy because I'm like, good, let's get your calendar and mark down your job.
Yeah.
And now these are the blocks of time you have to do your schoolwork. Sometimes that structure is necessary because when you have nothing to do, you will do nothing.
Absolutely. You'll scroll, play games.
Right.
Sleep.
But when you have, you know, just this life schedule, you'll say, okay, all right, so because for my kids, for example, they had co-op all day Monday and then Thursday nights during drama season, right? And then they had piano on this day, and so they knew, get up, besides the day I was at co-op all day, get up, play piano at 9, jump in the math lunch at 1, and they got all their schoolwork done at that time. So that block was good. Now, did they finish early some days? Yes. Were they allowed to watch Animal Planet on those days? Absolutely.
And that doesn't mean that you have to be so strictly beholden to that schedule that you can't like run off for a vacation for a week. But that structure, that ability to organize your time, that's a skill that carries on into adulthood anyway.
It does. And
if
I
you
still
don't
live my
build
life that way.
skill when, you know, they're younger and when they're teenagers, it's going to be that much harder for them to figure it out when they're adults.
Now, my recommendation is, and now everyone's like, how long should I homeschool my kindergartner? How long should I homeschool my 3rd grader? Start at an hour, and every year, well, the law is 3 to 4 hours. And that starts kind of 1st grade.
In the
So
state
start,
of Georgia.
huh?
In the state of Georgia.
So start at 2 hours, and then every year add a half hour. And if you do that, they're going to be right on track, right where they should be, and probably dual enrolling by 11th grade. Get that routine. So we know the little one's attention span is only so long.
Right.
So you start where the attention span is, and then every fall you stretch it that half hour, and they're not even going to feel it. Right. It's going to feel natural. You will have established a routine that they can take into adulthood and make it through 8 hours at a job.
Right. And build in breaks and downtime to your schedule, because please don't make your kindergarten sit there for 2.5 hours and expect for them to not have a complete meltdown.
Well, changing subjects does a lot
Not
for
only
that too. I was speaking to a kid Friday about, they were like, I'm really afraid of my lines. I don't feel like I have as much time as I need. And I said, study your lines for 25-30 minutes, take a break, switch to a different subject, do some math, come back. Don't just sit and barrel through that.
Right. So switch things up, take breaks. You know, a 15-minute break, a 30-minute break, you know, whatever you need. Do we need a nap? Everybody can take a nap.
Set the alarm for 20 minutes and take a nap.
Right?
Yeah.
Do we need a snack? Cool. You know, have little snacking things.
Are we frustrated by math and need to de-stress at the piano? Cool.
Yeah.
You know, that's how my kids did it. Jackson would be like, he'd get up, he'd go, and then go over to the piano and like, pom, 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 pom.
Well, and
then start playing something pleasant.
And we've talked before that, you know, the keys to homeschooling is building that relationship and getting to know your kids. And so while, yes, you need to have the schedule, but then also understand, like, look for those cues that your child's overwhelmed by something. And even if it's not quite break time, go ahead and take a break. If things are, you know, if that information's not getting in there, if, you know, they are showing signs that they are, you know, shutting down on the subject because something just isn't going in right, walk away from it and come back.
The coolest thing about having a schedule, and make the schedule and put it on a whiteboard in the kitchen, because if you don't honor your time, other people aren't going to honor your time.
Right.
And so I had relatives come in, I had neighbors stop, and people are like, well, you're home. Had other homeschoolers drop off 6 children. And so when I had that on my whiteboard, people knew, don't come in my house before 1, because you're not going to, I'd look at the board and go, And so I was able to train everyone to not barge into my home before 1 p.m. After 1 p.m.,
there's some flexibility.
Until they got in high school when they had to work until like 3.
Right.
It was cool. But everyone around me started honoring that schedule. I was honoring the schedule. I was honoring the children's time. And then everyone around us started honoring that schedule.
And kind of in conjunction with scheduling, and building good habits that scheduling will let you do. Also then make sure, because homeschool's going to give you the opportunity to accelerate, usually, because you're working one-on-one with a child. You have the opportunity to hone in on those strengths and to help them get through material faster. So you may wind up in a situation when you're working one-on-one with a child, they're going to move through material faster. So
some of it they're going to
fly through. It will not take a whole year to do some disciplines. habits. So that schedule kind of needs to also be a macro schedule, and you need to sort of plan out the entire arc of the education if you plan on homeschooling all the way through. I know that some families homeschool up to high school and then they're like, can't do that. And we can talk about that in a different video. If you're interested, let us know in the comments.
Oh, yeah, I have tons of recommendations.
But homeschooling all the way through toward graduation, which is entirely a doable thing. You need to kind of plan that out, because one of the mistakes that we made as a family is having a child who was more or less done with their education by the time he was 16, but didn't want to graduate until his peers graduated.
Yeah, that threw me. I saw that he was ready to graduate.
Because the community, like, there are other activities, there are other things that, other friend groups that are not homeschooled. And so there was this desire to have that senior experience alongside the friends that he had grown up with. And so he's like, but I don't want to graduate until they do. You have to be very careful with that you don't lose the momentum. Because if you've got this routine, if you have this schedule and you've set, and students are, they're sitting here and they're learning the way that they need to learn, and you're putting in a set amount of time every day, and you've built some good habits, you can lose them so fast. Don't let them lose those habits. If there's a reason, if your child's not emotionally mature enough to go on to college, to start a business, to, whatever their next step might look like, make sure you find reasons to stay engaged on a regular basis with that education. Because if you allow kind of that, well, we're more or less done, to creep in, then you're going to start building some really, really, really bad habits that will not serve these young people as adults.
For us, Jack decided that, because he was supposed to graduate at 16, like Jordan graduated at 16, and he said, I'm not ready for college. I don't want that.
Right.
So can we add more electives and cut my senior year in half? So, this was kind of co-op controlled, because all of his extras were coming through the co-op. And with me, it was just math, science, history, and the other thing. Math, science, history.
Language arts.
And language arts. And so I said, okay. And I just took the curriculum, split it, and said, okay, we'll do that over 2 years. And the director of the co-op was like, okay, we'll do this over the 2 years. But we added in things. We added in photography.
Right.
If your child is accelerated and they feel like they're not ready to take that next step into college, enrich. I get so excited, because this is just such an amazing opportunity to do something that is so unique and specific to that child. We have a child directing a show this year. Next year, they're interning and teaching.
Right.
Because I don't have anything else to teach them.
Right. But they as a family have decided that
not yet college.
Not ready to go to college.
So this is such an amazing opportunity to take all that running start you had and do something that's going to be a specific, unique experience for that child that the colleges are going to eat up.
Right. So don't take time off, because you're going to lose momentum. You're going to lose habits that you've built that are good.
Find something enriching, and for Jackson it was photography.
Another mistake that is very easy to make when homeschooling
is following someone else's plan.
Yeah.
So what happened was, first year homeschooling, and I'm a hyper-focused learner.
Right.
So I read all the homeschool books and made some decisions. We took types of learning tests, me, the kids. We did all these things, right brain, left brain. We figured all that out. We had whole conversations about it. Great. But then my mentor was like, no, that's not how you homeschool. You let your children be. We ended up breaking up as friends. But there were specific books, there was specific curriculum, there were specific things that I wanted to do that first year that she talked me out of. There were texts that she told me were garbage, and there were texts that she told me were good. And for my kids, it was opposite. Fortunately, I'm a quick study, but it cost me a lot of money to switch.
So, I guess the crux of that is there's advice out there. Listen to the advice, but take all of it with a grain of salt.
Well, what's best for someone else's kids isn't best for your kids. We're customizing education.
Right.
What's best for my son wasn't best for my daughter.
Right.
Because we're customizing education.
And that's why the opportunities of homeschooling. This is one of the strengths of it. This is one of the things that we get to do by homeschooling our children, is giving them the opportunity to learn what's best for them.
Jordan's
best way for
literature
them.
journey and Jackson's literature journey couldn't have been more different.
Really couldn't.
No, Jordan was Victorian, like we are leaning into, like,
Well, and dystopian.
well, no, well, we got there. So I can give you the journey, which was crazy middle school, was Victorian.
That makes sense.
And then we followed the history cycle around.
Mm-hmm.
And so ancient history, we were doing Magic Treehouse type
Got
styles.
it. Yep.
And then medieval, I don't remember. And then when we got into like colonial times, she read all of Little House on the Prairie. As we moved into the World Wars, we read Little Women, and like it was all like right there.
Right.
And then when she got to senior year, we had done all that, and it was dystopian literature. Jackson could care less about fiction. It's like, who are we studying in history? Give me their biography. Biographies every year. It still pays with the classical
Right.
history.
Absolutely.
So Jackson read biographies every year, and then senior year we were done with all that, and he read true stories about people in his chosen field.
Right.
He still reads Ghost in the Wires over and over because that was a book about a hacker who did bad things, went to jail, and then taught people how to catch hackers.
Right.
My dad has that book.
Yeah, no, what Jackson's favorite book. You really need to look at what your children have patience for. You really need to look at what lights that. Now, poor things, I made them both read some African American novels that they still tell me about myself with. But I read Roots at 10 years old. I don't see why my kids couldn't read Roots at 16.
Your daughter commented on that today.
Oh, she's sick of me.
Yeah.
And it was
been many
Roots.
years,
It was
and
Maya
she's
Angelou. I know why the cage bird sings.
Oh,
That's a hard one.
I didn't read that till college.
It was for colored women who considered suicide when the rainbow was enough. It's an amazing play. Not so much fun as a book.
Right.
Really bad as a Tyler Perry movie. Don't watch it. Bad. But, you know.
Hot takes with Andrea.
So what I did with literature with them, it's Jordan.
Calling right now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. You should answer it. What's she gonna say?
What's up? I'm on camera. What's up?
Oh, just wanted to double check. There are no food sensitivities
No, just peanuts.
after food.
Who asked for food? Okay. Yep. Okay. Bye. What was I saying? So what I did was they pick a book, and then based on the book they pick, I would pick something that I thought was more classic they needed to read.
Right.
That was in the line of what they were attracted to. So like we're customizing education, which is how we went down this whole rabbit trail.
Right.
Pay attention to your kids, not to your neighbor. That's it.
And this is why we should not compare our kids to others.
Which then leads us to the next mistake in homeschooling,
Mm-hmm.
which is comparing yourself to your neighbors.
Yeah.
Don't compare your kids to somebody else's kids.
So what happened was, same friend, she'd say, "How are your kids doing?" And I'd be like, "Oh yeah, Jordan finished the entire second grade by Christmas, and Jackson is halfway through the entire Mark Twain series because the only fiction I ever got him to read was Mark Twain." "Well, we don't measure like that. Oh, you're overdoing it. You're not homeschooling right." Okay, lady. She was measuring herself to me, and she was projecting on me that I was doing too much with my kids.
Because her kids weren't
Because
doing
her
that
kids
much.
weren't doing it. I'm sorry, I taught her 12-year-old to read. Got a trick for you. If there's a TV show they like and they won't read, turn that on and turn the sound off, turn on closed captioning. They'll be reading in 2 weeks.
Yep.
It works. That's how I taught a 12-year-old to read. So anyway, so there's that. There's someone, people will project onto you because they're comparing themselves to you. So be careful of that energy.
Right.
But at the same time, your child is tracking along just fine. Your child is 11, and at a co-op, you meet an 11-year-old boy who's going to Morehouse. Don't freak out. Morehouse is for him.
Right.
I understand that. I often intimidate people with my intelligence.
Now, there
Mm-hmm.
are some standards, like understanding general milestones can
Mm-hmm.
be helpful.
Yes.
Because if your child's not meeting that, you might need to find additional supports
Mm-hmm.
for them to be able to have the level of education that they need as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
In the state of Georgia, what they require us to do is standardized testing every 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
You don't actually report that to anybody. That's more for you to know
It
what your
literally
kids
says,
are doing.
this is for your information.
Right. And honestly, if you're engaged with your kids and you're working hands-on with them, you're going to know what those results
No,
are.
I got some surprises.
Really?
Yeah.
Mine always pretty well tracked with what I knew.
The
not that
surprises
they were
were just
excelling on everything,
weird
but-
little holes,
That's fair.
like Roman numbers, or there was a reading comprehension gap where they could read
Right.
fluently. And so then you knew to go, when you do that test every 3 years, and some parents do that test yearly, you know immediately what your child wasn't paying attention to on a
Right.
given day or month. And you can go back and fix before that hole becomes a canyon,
Right.
you know, that you can't recover.
It's comparing your child to the average.
Right. So that's hopeful, but don't look at the kid next door.
And even then, even comparing your child to the average, that isn't necessarily a reason to completely freak out and flip tables. If you do get surprised, if there is something there that you weren't expecting, then go in and troubleshoot that one thing. Don't just upend everything that you've been doing and think that everything's a failure. Just kind of fine tune whatever needs to be fine tuned. And if there's something like you didn't realize, my youngest child was exceptionally good at masking his difficulties reading.
Yes.
He could sit there and he would get just enough out of a text to be able to explain the entire text with a couple of little discrepancies. And it wasn't until much, much later in his journey that we realized that he was filling that in from his head and that he was really struggling to read. And so the thing that you can do by comparing to the average is you might see places where you need to bring in some professional help, especially if you have learning differences that you don't know how to address yourself. Because there are times and places for that, depending on what your child needs. So that brings us to the next homeschool mistake.
Is not asking for help. I have said this a million times. I will keep saying, you will get sick of me saying this. The most important thing you need to know as a homeschooling parent is what you don't know. Because once you know what you don't know, you know that you need to find that resource to help your child.
Right.
I hired a middle school math tutor to teach me and my older child middle school math, so that I can then turn around and teach my younger school middle school math. Because while I was really good in algebra 100 years before, middle school math was different. And I didn't remember any of that.
Now, kind of a little sub mistake that can happen here. Be super aware of what people are teaching if you bring in somebody to help you teach. Make sure that you know that what they're teaching is what you're expecting them to teach. This can cause problems in a couple of different ways. One, you might think that your kids are getting certain information. Maybe it's a math thing. Maybe they're doing pre-algebra and you have one conception of what pre-algebra looks like and what subjects are being covered. But the person teaching, if you're not aware of what that work is, if you're not following that syllabus along with your kids
And the scope
and the
and
work that
sequence
they're
of what's in
doing,
a typical...
right.
Well,
you may not realize that they've skipped something that you thought was super important, and so then you move on to algebra and now you've got this hole that you don't know about because somebody else taught the pre-algebra stuff and you weren't on top of what that looks like.
that's why I had her teach me and him.
Right, exactly. And then the other way that can manifest is there can come a point, especially when you're homeschooling over the long haul, that everybody sort of gets burnt out and you
start outsourcing everything.
And you start outsourcing everything. And you may think that your child is getting a history class. And what's being taught in that class might not be history at all.
No, it might be current events and lean political. Not something that we believe in teaching kids. We believe that that's a job of the parent to teach current events and political values.
Right.
We teach just the history, nothing but the history. Now, do the children draw conclusions? Absolutely. Do they take over our lessons sometimes with their conclusions? Absolutely. But we know that that's coming from the home.
Right.
And so then we can moderate that discussion and keep everybody respectful, or say, too much, too current.
Well, and
away.
Sometimes, there's curriculum and there are teachers and there are programs that have, like, say, a heavily religious bent.
Right.
Some of them may not be upfront about that religious bent. And so there's some families that's what they're looking for, and if that's what you're looking for, great. As long as you're aware that that's what they're teaching. You know, on the flip side, if you have been teaching from a religious standpoint and you would like to continue that, and you talk to if you don't vet a program properly, they may not teach the religious things the way that you're comfortable doing that.
That's the coolest thing about being able to homeschool, and then being able to find resources to teach your kids. A lot of people I know turn to their grandparents to teach history. You know these people.
Right.
You know what history they know. You've watched the documentaries with them. You know what the kids are getting. A lot of people turn to programs like ours. It concerns me when a parent doesn't know what we're teaching.
Right.
Like, the homework goes to the child and the parent.
Yep.
We have a platform that we've built, that Mr. Troy has built, and the homework goes out to the parent and the student. And if I have to reject an assignment, I explain that why, and that goes to the parent and to the student. So now these parents are seeing exactly what we're teaching.
Well, and the families, the kids that are most successful in our program,
The parents who are all in there.
Right. They take the curriculum booklet home, and the parents have read it too. And those are the kids that are most successful in our program. Because something happens when you detach from the educational process when you're homeschooling. That's one of the places where we've
I'm not saying I didn't detach from calculus.
That's fair.
But I wasn't doing that. But Mira's 100% right. Be as involved as you can all the way through the process, because when we tap out and we stop paying attention, either you're going to have holes or misinformation or
things that don't align with your
agenda
values.
might creep in.
Right. And it may be things that don't align with
I
your values.
don't want my agenda on someone else's kids.
Right.
And I don't want someone else's agenda on my kids.
Right.
So, and so what's so cool is what I was about to say is, when you're homeschooling, you have some say in friend groups. You have some say in teachers. And public school, like, homeschooling doesn't have to be all mom and dad.
Right.
You get to say who your kids teach. How cool is that?
Right?
You get to say who your kids' teachers are.
So you know that if your child needs this certain personality.
Like that track teacher I almost killed. Stranded my daughter in the woods. I will murder you. Anyway, go ahead.
But my youngest child, we've gone through a number of different people to sit down and help him work with things, and we finally found the person. There's
the personality.
The person with the right personality to sit with him and help him work through things. He's truly excited about sitting down and working with that person, whereas pretty much everybody that we've gone through.
He humored me for a while.
But that's what he's always done, is he sort of sat there and humored somebody, and then he was just like, all right, wandering off. No, this is somebody he truly connects with and wants to do that work. And so, a mistake that homeschool families can make, and this goes back to not asking for help when you need it, is not trying to find somebody that, if your child's struggling, that can connect with them on that subject. Math especially can be really hard, because everybody does math differently, and for so much math there are so many different ways to think about it and to get there, that you just have to kind of cycle through people until you find the one who matches your child's brain.
Right. And parents, if you have to relearn math, Khan Academy and YouTube.
Right.
But because I've seen people take their kids to math tutors and it wasn't a good personality match, and that person tapped out. But at the end of the day, you have control over this. Ask around. Don't just blindly choose the math tutor that your friend used, but sit through a lesson or two with them and find out if it's a good match. And okay, this is going to sound like a lot. Never leave your kid alone, like 100% alone to be taught by an adult.
Right.
Don't ever do that.
No.
We have a rule. We're never alone with our students.
In
there
our
have
buildings,
to be
two unrelated adults.
at all times. We're covering our butts. We're keeping ourselves in line, and our parents are comfortable that we're not going to let someone else mess with their kids. Confidence-wise, my biggest thing growing up, where I had a lot of teachers undermine my confidence. So I'm not talking about nefarious stuff here.
Though that is a concern.
Although it is a concern. But undermining a child's confidence, not really listening to the child's questions, letting other children bully children. Like, there's so many reasons to not just kick your kid out the car and say, thank goodness I don't have to do geometry. Be involved. We have an open door policy. If a parent wants to come sit in a big comfy chair on the other side of the room, they are welcome.
Yep.
So when you're getting help for your child, still
stay engaged.
Still stay engaged. We hope that helped.
If you have any more questions, if you'd like to know our thoughts on any more of this, let us know in the comments.
If there's some specific items you want us to touch on, please leave those in the comments. We love that. So, yeah.
Until next time.